Hi everybody, my name is Chakie Ebrahimi, and today I'll be speaking with y'all about language attitudes and the impact of childhood language exposure. Now, you may have noticed my use of the word y'all in my previous sentence, and you could have made the assumption that I was from Texas or somewhere in the South. Or your focus may have been drawn to my name, Chakie Ebrahimi, to which I would assume you definitely didn't think I was from Texas or the South. These sort of perceptions that are stroking through your heads right now are exactly why I want to ask the research question, what features of the sociolinguistic landscape drive individuals' perceptions of accented speakers throughout life? Now, I first began getting into this subject because both my parents immigrated here from Iran. They both grew up speaking Farsi and it was their first language. However, whenever they came over here to America, my father in his teens while my mother was in her early 20s, they both learned English. So they've been fluent in English for well over 25 years. Now, I can promise you when I say this, they are fluent and probably more fluent than me most of the time. So whenever I would hear the phrase, "I'm sorry, sweetie, could you please repeat what she's saying?" whenever a given worker or maybe adult couldn't understand my parents when I was little, I was really confused. What they were saying was very clear to me and very clear to my friends. So why was there some sort of unconscious bias that people were presenting towards them just because they had an accent? So in order to get to the bottom of this is why I'm now studying language attitudes. Now, I want to ask, how many of you in here have seen the movie Aladdin? Okay, so pretty much all of you. Now, how many of you guys have noticed that he speaks with an American accent? Okay, less of you. Now, how many of you guys noticed that the villain Jafar speaks with a British accent? Okay, close to none of you guys. Now, this may seem trivial at first. I mean, they're in a made-up Arabian country. Who cares what accent they're speaking with? But it's actually very important, and Lippy Green in 1997 proved that cartoons can teach kids to discriminate and used Aladdin as one of her main big examples. Picture this. You're a 4-year-old child with little to no accent exposure, and you're soaking up information like a sponge. You go to watch the movie Aladdin, and you are first introduced to a British accent through Jafar. From then on, it's highly likely that you will view any sort of British accented speaker the way you view Jafar, as mean and villainous and evil, and you would carry this sort of bias with you until someone brought up a different depiction of a British accented speaker, and a British accented speaker was shown in a positive light to you. And then from there, you would likely view an American accented speaker as heroic and playful and fun, the same way that Aladdin is. Now, this sort of thing that Lippy Green discusses is called fast track to meaning, and it's a tactic used by Disney constantly. This basically means that Disney has used a British accent or any sort of accent as a way to make character development easier on them. If I present to you multiple movies where a British accented speaker is evil and villainous, at some point you're going to catch on to the pattern and start subconsciously viewing any British speaker as evil and villainous, and from there I don't really have to develop my character anymore. So if you've seen multiple movies with a British accented speaker being villainous, when you see Jafar, it doesn't matter what he's saying to you, you're probably going to perceive him as evil and villainous. Now, this also works with voices, it's not just accents. I want to bring up this beautiful picture of the evil queen from Disney. Now, can anyone in here impersonate a witch for me? I'll take a volunteer. What does a witch sound like to you guys? Nikki, impersonate a witch for me.
Oh, don't you get
Thank you, Nikki. That was an incredible impression. Notice how she used a really strained tone of voice, and she actually did add a little bit of an accent into that. Now, a strained tone of voice is not inherently evil, but it's what Nikki has been programmed to think since her childhood what a witch sounds like. What she was taught in her childhood still reflects what she views a witch and someone evil and mean like a witch like today. And you may be wondering, how do our brains process these sort of assumptions? Why is it that whenever I hear a voice, I can comprehend it and understand that it's similar to that of a witch or a British accent similar to that of Jafar? Well, this all goes into the different branches of linguistics, which I have listed here above. However, it's more specifically going into phonology. Phonology can be defined as the study of speech patterns and sounds. So basically, it's how our brains process, understand, and then go on to judge different speech sounds and patterns. Flachia et al. Actually did a study on this in 2009, where they tested children's ability to identify accent-related information. They took 5 to 7-year-old children that were British natives and presented them with a regional accented speaker and a foreign accented speaker. Now, before I go on, I would like to define to you all what a regional and foreign accented speaker is. A regional accented speaker would be, for example, someone that speaks the same language as me and it was their first language, like a Texan, and then versus someone from New Jersey. They both speak the same language, it was both of their first languages, however, they both speak it with an accent that is made regional. Now, an example of a foreign accent would be like my parents. They both had Farsi as their first language, so they went on to have a foreign accent in their second language of English. Now that I have that aside, they presented them with the regional accent of an Irish speaker, and then a foreign accent of a French accented speaker, and all speaking English. When they were presented with these three accented speakers, they were then asked to do a categorization task in order to see if they were aware of how different the accent was from their own, or if there was any accent at all. The study actually revealed that they noticed most prevalently the accent in the French accented speaker, which was the foreign accent speaker, and then they noticed the accent a little less in the Irish accented speaker, and then they noticed no accent at all with the British native speakers because it was native to their own accent. This is extremely significant because it teaches us that we can have very skewed perceptions of people, and phonology can actually be used in our daily lives. It's also actually been used all throughout history and even in the Bible. This is an image of the Gileadites devising a test to sort of see if the Ephraimites could pronounce the word shibboleth. Now, let me explain this to you all. In the book of Judges, there was a battle between the Gileadites and the Ephraimites, and the Gileadites ended up winning, and they got a certain territory past the Jordan River. Now, the key in this is the word shibboleth. Basically, the Gileadites had the sound sh in their language, so the sh they could pronounce. However, the Ephraimites could not pronounce it. They would pronounce sh with an s sound, like sa. So, whenever the Ephraimites would be trying to escape and go past the Jordan River, the Gileadites would ask them, say the word shibboleth. The second they would say the word sibboleth instead, they were able to identify that they were not one of their own, and they would kill them on the spot. Yeah, pretty harsh, I know. Now, this is extremely significant because it shows how we can use phonology and different sounds and speech patterns in our daily lives and even in history, like the Bible, and it shows us how we can actually use it to perceive others differently. Now, similarly to Flaccia, Weatherhead et al. Wanted to test out how children could differentiate between their own accent and another person's accent. They took 4 to 5-year-old American children and they presented them with 6 different accented speakers. 1 native accented speaker from America, 1 Scottish accented speaker, a Spanish accented speaker, an Indonesian accented speaker, and 2 more, including Jamaican and Australian. Now, from there, they presented them with these speakers and asked them to see if they were aware of them having a different accent. And the children actually proved that they could feel some sort of accent distance. And accent distance is basically just understanding that a certain accent is further away from yours. So they actually were able to comprehend and perceive the other accents differently than their own, and could go on to make judgments based upon that, which is why it's so significant on how we present accents and keep accented people in the media. Yet again, Lippy Green provides us with another example from Disney's original version of Three Little Pigs. Now, this came out in the 1930s, so many of y'all may not have known about it, but there was actually a scene where the big bad wolf was depicted as a stereotypical Jewish peddler. They gave him a hooked nose and a Yiddish accent, and we now know today that it's extremely derogatory and extremely racist, but this was the 1930s. Disney later pulled that version of the show 14 years later. However, they kept the Yiddish accent on the big bad wolf to keep going with their fast track to meaning tactic, where they could use the accent to make the big bad wolf villainous and mean. This is extremely significant because, again, a child could go on to see any sort of person that may be a stereotyped Jewish person or someone with a Yiddish accent and go on to believe them to be this big, bad, scary person when in reality they're just any other human like us. Now, this is an extremely negative example of accents and accent bias. However, there are positive examples in our media too. I would like to bring up Sofia Vergara. For those of you that don't know who she is, she was born and raised in Colombia, and she's an actress here in the US now. She speaks with a Colombian accent, and she got her big break on the hit show Modern Family as Gloria Pickett. I see some fans in the audience. So she actually is very well known for her Colombian accent and is very widely loved for it. In the show Modern Family, she actually uses it as comedic relief constantly and is actually praised for it and hired for her accent. So there are some positive aspects that can come with it. However, I'm discussing both biases today. Now, in regards to what an accent bias is, Pellet and Bonatti actually describe accent bias as the study of unwarranted prejudices towards towards different speech patterns of people. In order to test out accent bias, Kinsler and De Jesus in 2013 evaluated the social desirability, personality characteristics, and geographic origins of northern and southern accented speakers. They took children ranging from ages 5 to 6 and 9 to 10, and from Chicago, Illinois in the north, and Tennessee in the south on the border of Alabama, and presented them with northern and southern accented speakers. From there, they asked them to rate these speakers on if they would want to be their friend or not, how nice they were, how mean they thought they were, and see if there was any sort of stereotypes involved. Now, the 5 to 6-year-old northern children presented no stereotypes towards the southern accent speakers or the northern accent speakers, but they did state that they would rather be friends with a northern accented speaker that was similar to their own rather than the southern speakers. However, the 5 to 6-year-old southern children presented no bias and had no preference for which friends they would have. And then the 9 to 10-year-old children were the interesting part of this study. In both groups, they actually had no sort of preference for friendship, but they did stereotype. They stereotyped them in regards to their niceness, their meanness, how friendly they were. And this is actually extremely significant because the ramifications of this are that we are growing into those accent biases that we have in adulthood. As we get older, the 5 to 6-year-old children had no biases, but the 9 to 10-year-old did. As we get older, we're starting to produce these biases and starting to comprehend the differences between us and our accents. So it's extremely significant to this sort of accent bias. Now, one thing I will note about this study is that, unlike other studies, they did present the children with the speakers' faces. A lot of times in these studies, they will, either just present the audio clip or give like some sort of figure to blockade the sort of exterior and having some sort of judgment from that. But in this study, they did. Now, that might have skewed their opinions, which is precisely why I want to do my proposed method, where I can test out if not only childhood language exposure is the thing, but also other factors. In my proposed method, I want to test preteens from the greater Houston area in a survey. I would likely get preteens from Catholic and Christian schools like ours, such as St. John Paul II or maybe St. Cecilia's, and I want them to have different cultural and language backgrounds. Some maybe like me with a lot of language exposure due to my family, or some maybe with minimal to no language exposure. From there, I want to present them with different accented speakers in audio clips and give them a Likert scale to rate them on. So I want to rate them on friendliness, how nice they think they are, how friendly, how fun, etc. And then I want to see how they would react. Then I'm going to take a separate group of preteens from the same schools and present them with an audio clip and the face of the speaker that's using the accent. From there, we can test out and finally see if the accent is the sole reason for these biases, or if it's some exterior factors that go into it, maybe how they look, their skin color, or anything else that may be seen from the outside. And we can finally, get an answer to whether it's a sole accent biases or there's exterior factors that go into it. I personally hypothesize that those that have more language exposure will likely be more open and kind towards those that have accents, whereas those that have minimal language exposure will probably feel more comfortable with those that have similar accents to them. So I'm super excited to figure out my research and see what the results actually will be, and I thank you all for coming tonight. And if you want to be a part of the study or know someone that would, you can contact me with my phone number or my email. Thank you.
What do you think has more effect on having less bias? Not growing up with any negative connotations of certain accents, like from Disney, or being exposed to more?
That's actually a really interesting question. I didn't really touch too much on that in my studies, but I think it would just depend on the person, depending on if it was their own family or they were exposed to it in general. But in general, exposure is the media, and so I would put media under that sort of exposure as well. I actually did, but it was sort of mixed considering they were using different accents each time around. There's different examples, such as a southern character in the media is often portrayed as dumb or ignorant, or maybe a British accent, although in Disney they're portrayed as villainous, many times they'll be presented as high class and posh, and that's where that sort of idea comes from. So there are definitely certain biases that are used more or less. Yes? I didn't really touch on that in my study, but just based upon what I have researched, I would guess that it could be the media law. You don't necessarily see Asian accent speakers portrayed in, a more attractive way, whereas again, British accented speakers can be portrayed in a really attractive way. So I would look it on the media personally. Y'all can pick. I don't know. Yeah. It definitely was easier to find negative effects, but also it is important to note that studies are likely going towards like something that may prove their point, and most people are trying to prove that accent bias is a valid thing. So I did see a lot more negative things. There definitely are positive aspects, but I think it would just depend on the accent with that as well. No, you're good. $1,000%. There are much more like positive accent biases. Like for example, the Sofia Vergara example was much more recent versus the Aladdin and the Three Little Pigs example. They were all in the 20th century. But there definitely are still negative ones out there. I don't know if you all have seen the childhood show Jessie. They definitely portray Robbie, the Indian character's accent, in a very negative light, and they make fun of him a lot. So it can go both ways. Yes, Bauer.
So it's pretty clear how children can be very susceptible to accent biases, but how does that affect them as they grow up? Like, does that instill deep-rooted biases that aren't so prevalent on the surface, but may factor into how they treat certain people with different accents?
1,000%. That's exactly why I brought up my parents. I mean, I can still see it within my parents today, like the way adults will treat them. Like they would orient themselves to me, a child, rather than my parents just said an American accent. And even like right now, Nikki is almost an adult. Or are you an adult? She's 18, I think. I don't know. She's 17. She's almost an adult, guys. She still portrayed the witch with, an evil, villainous voice that was strained. And those are all things that came from her childhood. So yes. Dr. Drones. Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about linguistic profiling, the work of John Baugh?
Yes, I can. So, sorry, Savannah made me laugh in the back. So basically, in linguistic profiling, John Baugh actually did a study where they had black accented people on a cell phone and asking for jobs, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And from there, they saw people would discriminate against them and give them a job versus a more American, maybe white accented speaker. And it actually did prove that many people picked the more white-sounding speaker over the black accented speaker. So it's a lot in dialects as well. It's not just like full-blown accents in foreign versus regional. Yes.
I have curious in your research whether any of it indicated whether this is kind of a unique English language kind of phenomenon, or whether this occurs in other languages that speakers come into those languages.
For sure. I actually did do some research on that. For the sake of the time and everything, I focused on English. But there has been for sure different, accent biases within other languages and cultures. Again, in Farsi, they have different accents than Farsi, and I even see it in my own life that people will discriminate against certain regional accents in Iran. So yes, for sure. Yes.
Is there a correlation between like the type of accents people are exposed to younger, the type of accents that they tend to want to be more surrounded with? Like if someone grows up with a lot more British love, they tend to want to be surrounded by more British people, and they tend to want to that culture.
I think the tendencies for that may be dependent on the person, but they may find more comfort in British people, whether they would rather be around Americans or not. Nikki.
Okay, so that's really interesting. I was wondering, like, survey-wise, how are you gonna like get to your target audience?
So as I mentioned, I would likely go to Catholic and Christian schools in Houston. For example, St. John Paul II, my little sister goes there. She's in the audience right here. So I could, and I also went there myself, so I could probably get an easy in. I know the principal. I'm good friends with their family. So I could probably talk to them, and from there, I would definitely talk to the parents of the children and have them sign a contract and everything. But I hope that it would be an easy find, just because I know many of the people that go to these greater Catholic schools. Me too.
So you're talking about how British people were stereotypically attracted to
That's super, super interesting. I actually didn't touch on that in mine, but there are different biases that people have on American accent people. The ones that I've seen most in my own life, just from having an American accent and a foreign family, are that they find an American accent to be super cool, and it's like what they see in the media, so they really enjoy it. But they also do tend to have different opinions on Americans' intelligence that I will not get into. Shefna. I think they're starting to definitely be more progressive to get out of them, but they're still prevalent and still happen today. Ted.
The bias is like shifts over time, so what accent they're trying it negatively or positively.
I think that they would be, just considering, for example, the Yiddish accent speaker was in a time where Jewish people were heavily discriminated against, whereas now I think America's a lot more diverse and there's a lot more folks in different accents, so there's a lot more different accents presented in our media. So yeah. Okay, is that all the questions? Okay.
All right, give her a round of applause. So we will now have a 20-minute break. There are refreshments out there. If you need the bathrooms, there around that corner. See that 20 minutes.